Hi everybody.
What, no jaunty hey team?
You find Tennant and I decompressing in an undisclosed location after a pretty intense 2 weeks at COP27.
It was big. I think we'll be catching up on sleep debt for a while.
Yep,
But we survived.
we did survive.
Wiser, not sadder. And we've got some things to talk about what happened at COP27.
We did.
But first, for people who haven't been following the whole series of these videos over the last 2 weeks, what's a COP?
What is a COP? A conference of parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We're up to COP27. Everybody gets together every year to talk about how the nations of the world, 192 odd sovereign entities, can work together to defeat dangerous climate change. It is a consensus model. Everybody has to agree. Any one nation can blow things up, which critics of the UNFCCC process would say, Tennant, often leads to a lowest common denominator outcome.
It's remarkable that it achieves anything at all, but it does.
It does.
The Paris Agreement was struck, and it's been a very significant addition to the world's armoury and the spur to nations to fight climate change. And some things were agreed this time too. Maybe not as much, definitely not as much as many people would have wanted, but some significant outcomes. I should say as well, alongside the negotiations, there's a lot of other stuff happening. There's people from every part of civil society, academia, business and more, talking about what they know, sharing their knowledge on climate change and energy transitions. There's a vast conference going on alongside the Conference of the Parties. But the Conference of the Parties is the core deal. What happened?
It's the main game. As we record, it's been 36 hours or so since the gavel came down on COP27. I've been leafing through various reports, articles that are trying to sum up the COP. There's a lot of focus on the cover text.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And what made it into the cover text, what didn't make it in the cover text.
This is the overarching decision under which all the other decisions hang.
Right. And in particular, a push to strengthen some wording which was included in Glasgow, the COP26 cover text, around the phase out of unabated coal. There are a bunch of nations that were quite keen to see the cover text for COP27 speak to the phase down of all fossil fuels.
Unabated fossil fuels.
Unabated fossil fuels. Didn't make it.
No. Big push, stoutly resisted, because it would have had to have been agreed to by a lot of countries that export and produce and consume a lot of unabated fossil fuels. Once upon a time, I think Australia might have been on the side that was pushing against that language, but this time Australia was squarely in the pack with the United States, Europe,
Canada. Another big fossil fuel producing nation.
Yep. And a lot of developing countries that are highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change.
Yep.
They couldn't get that, but the Glasgow language didn't get weakened. And frankly, there was a lot of talk this year that climate change was going to take a back seat to concerns around the global energy crisis, the potentially imminent global recession, and that didn't happen. The nations of the world reiterated their intent, their resolution to pursue 1.5 degrees of global warming as the limit we're trying to stay within. And again called for the phase down of unabated coal and the phase out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. or the elimination of them. So that was disappointing to those who wanted stronger language.
Yep.
There was new language in the cover text about the need to grow global use of renewable energy, which wasn't in the Glasgow text. But that wasn't all that it said about energy systems. There was another phrase in there. What was that?
It was low emissions technology.
Low emissions energy sources.
There you go.
And what are they?
Yeah.
Well, you might ask.
That is an excellent question.
They're not defined in the text. That text was introduced at the very, very last minute, such that some parties say they didn't see it before it was agreed to. And some have been worried that it means a call to expand the use of unabated gas, but it was certainly understood by those who did read it to mean nuclear energy and CCS. But I think we're probably going to see a bit of a tussle over the coming year over what that did mean, and maybe very likely we will see another fight about these issues at COP28 in Dubai.
So my sort of overarching takeout on the cover text is that there was a bunch of countries that were sort of arguing for more ambition.
Yes.
There was a bunch of countries that are arguing for less ambition,
Okay.
and they sort of fought each other to a draw.
Yeah.
It was a status quo
I think that's right.
result. And there's been a lot of focus on the cover text, Tennant, in the media. It's very dramatic, and it's kind of relatively easy to wrap one's head around. But a lot of the substantive outcomes actually happened in the specific negotiation streams. And
Yes.
one of the other ones that's been getting a lot of commentary is this new fund that's been set up for loss and damage. Which is around the flows of financial support that were mooted some 30 years ago to, I would use the word compensate, if that's the right word or not, who knows, compensate developing nations for the impacts of climate change, largely caused by developed nations who are historically the largest emitters of carbon and other greenhouse gases, for the impacts of those climate changes. And one of the nation that's really been the moral articulator of this argument was Pakistan.
That's right. Pakistan having suffered horrifyingly devastating floods this year. And with a pavilion, a national pavilion at this COP, with the memorable phrase, "What happens in Pakistan won't stay in Pakistan."
Yeah.
So they made the case for it. A 10-year-old girl from Ghana made the case for it in a memorable intervention at one of the stock-taking plenaries to assess progress in the course of the COP. And some of essentially the major advanced economies signalled that they were open to something along these lines. Not to like a blank check, unlimited compensation or liability for climate change, but open to the concept of creating a fund that would help to respond to and address loss and damage in vulnerable developing countries. So they agreed to that. But the actual detail of this thing is still to be set up.
Detail in terms of how that money will be allocated, exactly who's eligible for it,
how much money there's going to be,
where the money comes from. Are we talking about nation states? There seems to be some suggestion that there might be a variety of sources, including reallocation of funds that are available for general development through existing financial institutions and the like. Nevertheless, this result was warmly welcomed by developing nations that have been arguing for it for decades, and was a surprising outcome given that it actually wasn't even on the agenda for discussion just a few weeks before COP27 kicked off.
Yeah, so that's the historic outcome. The other two things that I would say were significant outcomes were more detail on the mitigation work program. This is about urgently scaling up ambition for reducing emissions pre-2030, and what emerged didn't sound quite as urgent as many would have wanted. The European Union and many others were pushing for an even more robust process. But it is going to involve meetings every year, workshops every year, high-level ministerial meetings every year from now to 2030 on scaling up mitigation, scaling up ambition. We need to see if it all just winds up in a tail-chasing talk fest, but it looks like a bolster to the Paris process for everybody chivying themselves and each other to more and more closely approach what is needed to keep climate change within 1.5 degrees. So that's not bad, pretty good. Then the other one I'd point to is Article 6.
Article 6, one of the blockbuster results coming out of Glasgow, sort of a framework for international carbon trading. There was a lot of detailed negotiations.
Really detailed.
This COP, the eye-wateringly boring was the description that one of the negotiators gave to me.
I swear it's important. Don't fall asleep.
It's super important. So they made some significant progress in terms of how those markets might be operationalised. We're not there yet in terms of all the detail being resolved. I think there's going to be more to play out over the coming year. But we're getting closer to sort of international agreement around how that will all work. Not universally welcomed. There's a bunch of people that are fans.
Very delicate language.
Of these.
There's people at COP who hate the guts of Article 6, who think it's false solutions, hot air, greenwashing, you name it, they don't like it. But the negotiators themselves have been working to build a lot of integrity into these international cooperative approaches. They are listening to the concerns that they hear from stakeholder land, and I think immediately after this conference result, cooperation in terms of exchanging linkages and cooperation on a bilateral basis between countries, that the legal environment for that has been pretty much sorted, but the new global market mechanism will take certainly at least another year's work to stand up, and plenty of scrutiny is needed along the way to ensure that is producing genuine abatement and that nothing is being double counted. So while I'm a fan of Article 6, I would say that critics of Article 6 serve a very useful function, and I know any of them listening to this will feel a warmth in their heart that I'm recognising that.
I think that it's certainly the case that there is always the potential for carbon markets to not have integrity. So there's the potential for it to be a lot of shuffling of money around, shuffling of credits around that doesn't amount to everything. And we should be concerned if it is be the focus of particularly activity from business to the detriment of folk doing stuff within their own operations.
Yes.
So it is a part of the overarching architecture. As long as it's not the whole deal, then it can play a useful role in that pathway towards decarbonisation.
I think that's a very sensible view.
Should we talk a little bit about Australia's role in this COP, because it was much remarked upon?
It was, not least by us. Yeah, Australia, that is. Australia spent a lot of time talking about Australia's role, not just the minister, not just the delegation, but I think Australians at the COP love to talk about Australia. And why not? We're fascinating.
I think from a stakeholder perspective, there was a sense that we were playing a proactive and constructive role in the COP more broadly, which was really welcome.
Now, I will make a controversial statement and say that on many topics, Australia has played a constructive and responsible role for many, many years. But that's certainly not how a lot of people saw it. And the approach that we had this time, having come to the COP with a substantially increased nationally determined contribution for emissions reduction for 2030, visibly backing big pushes for higher ambition and phasing down fossil fuels, the strong role that the Pacific and Indigenous elders had in our pavilion, and the events that were going on there. I think all of these things and the coffee played a very positive role in perceptions of Australia. We've got to live up to that.
Yes.
Both at home and at the next meetings of the parties. But it was a good start.
I thought it was really interesting. You know, clearly the minister and the negotiators felt a need to be seen to be leading on some of the critical questions that were before the parties, notably. The text that they were trying to drive in that cover statement around peaking emissions by 2025, phase out of unabated fossil fuels more broadly, quite ambitious statements. I think you could make a strong argument that Australia's own internal policies aren't necessarily aligned with that. So that there is somewhat of a discrepancy between the arguments that are being made at an international level and the ones that are being prosecuted back at home. That's arguably a productive tension in which it encourages the government to reflect on what more it can do.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got, thinking of both the federal and the state levels, we've got a lot of progress, but also a lot of implementation work to do on the role of coal in the electricity sector. We've got a national electric vehicle strategy under development and out for consultation that looks like it's going to involve fuel efficiency standards for vehicles for the first time in Australia. We've got a national energy performance strategy out for consultation that appears to have a strong theme of electrification, and we've got state policies that are heading in the direction of substantially scaling back domestic gas use, although they've got a bit of evolution to do as well. So, we're headed in the direction that we've been talking about. I agree, we have to show that we're walking the walk and not stumbling in the process. Like, we've got to do those things well, not just change what we're doing without an adequate substitute.
And the last thing that occurs to me, that given that this is our wrap video and we probably need to speak to, is it is looking forward to 2026 and the potential that Australia may be hosting its own COP, and this seems like a very plausible outcome. Switzerland was in the running and they've pulled out. Turkey has put its hand up.
Forget about it, Turkey.
It's regarded as a bit of a dark horse. I think the smart money at this stage, at least, is on Australia. Indeed, Chris Bowen, I think we'd say pretty bullish in one of the speeches that he gave to stakeholders, saying, well, I know how to count. And we're looking pretty good. I don't know, Tennant. What do you reckon? What is the prospect of a COP just 4 years away in Australia? What does that put you in mind of?
Well, I think if we are going to host it in conjunction with the Pacific's got to be happy about that, and I think showing our good faith over the next couple of years in terms of national ambition and probably the development of the next NDC for 2035, I think will be an important part of that. But I think it would be amazing for Australia to host a COP. It would be tremendously great for more Australians to be able to participate
Yep.
and see what is going on,
Yep.
and take on board some of the developments from countries that we don't hear a lot about inside Australia. I think it would be great for everybody else who goes to these COPs to know the pain of Australians in terms of absurdly long journey times to get there.
Yep.
But I think we'd need to do it well. And what would be your top two lessons for good COP holding out of COP27?
Look, I suppose there's been some complaints about COP27. I think it's important to acknowledge that this was a COP held in a developing country,
Yes.
and that has its own challenges. And
It
so,
does.
while there's various people on Twitter and other places sort of complaining about various elements of the COP.
One of those.
It all happens in a context, right?
A context of princess-like privilege and self-involved. No, but look, genuinely, the food was really bad. It was bad. There wasn't enough of it.
Yeah.
People were unhappy.
Yeah. It was, so some of the basics like that, which is just, basic event management. I think, we'd want to be able to do that well. For me, and we were talking about this a little bit, it felt like we were really in a bubble for those 2 weeks, and I understand that that is to some degree by necessity. But I would really like, in terms of how Australia approaches this COP, to find ways of, the folk that are coming from around the world to learn a bit from Australia, and also for Australians to learn a bit from the folk that are coming around the world.
Yep.
I think that it could be really transformative in terms of the public debate, to be exposed to all of those different stories from all those different places, many of them less fortunate than us and far less capacity to deal with the ravages of climate change. And while there's significant parts of Australia that have struggled with bushfires and floods over the last 2 or 3 years, those things are happening in parts of the world that don't have governments with the resources that we have to support their citizens through that. And so I think that would be a really productive thing to think about, that collective task that we all have. But also Australia has, incredible technology, particularly the application of renewable energy, the rollout by, 2026, we presumably will be some way along towards that 83% renewable energy target.
Yep.
How you operate a high penetration renewable energy grid, how you electrify residual gas load, like all these things that we'll be grappling with over the next few years. Like we have the opportunity to solve some of those problems and share those learnings with the world. And I think a COP would be an opportunity to showcase that. And I think something that you said before, I think is really important, which it is a milestone, helpfully sort of around the middle of the decade, towards which governments can work with a view to kind of having a set of energy and climate policies of which we can be proud.
Yeah.
And that we feel comfortable sort of taking on that leadership position, because of course it's not just hosting, it's the opportunity to shape the conversation globally around by taking on the COP presidency. Like we're talking a lot about where should host and who can allocate all these people. There is a logistical exercise, but the real power of hosting a COP is taking on that leadership role.
Yeah, that's right. And so my top two lessons out of this COP for an Australian potential hosting is, one, on the logistical side, host it in a major city with a lot of pre-built infrastructure.
Yep.
Just like having a lot of temporary buildings and a lack of depth in the accommodation and the supporting services around. It's not a good idea. Don't pick places that are symbolic but not practical. The second thing is that to exert that leadership, Australia will really have to invest in its climate diplomacy for 18 months to 2 years leading up to the COP. Don't be introducing ideas kind of out of nowhere towards the end of things. Be building a clear sense through both your formal diplomacy and a lot of cultural and informal ambassadors for a long time before that COP. Put a lot of national effort into that process. For the COP21 in Paris that achieved the Paris Agreement, every arm of French policy, every French diplomatic post, French businesses with a close relationship with the government, everybody was pushing for that success for a long time before, and Australia would need to invest likewise. It will be a big deal if we get it, and it's going to take some prep.
Yep. And that's I think that's the exciting thing. And I suppose, Paris is regarded in some ways diplomatically as the gold standard.
Yep.
I think, for better or worse, there's been a lot of criticism of the way that Egypt approached the presidency this year.
Yes, there was. There was a sense about 24 hours out from the close of the COP that maybe we'd all been wrong. Maybe they were going to pull a rabbit out of a bag, and it was all going to come good. And in the end, it was pretty messy.
Yeah.
A lot of people felt that the presidency wasn't transparent in its approach. What they were trying wasn't working. We did get some significant outcomes, but I think there was a lot of grumpiness that will carry forward.
Grumpiness and fractiousness in the sense that, particularly with things like the cover text, it was being imposed on people rather than having a sense of ownership over it, which is why it ran long. And ultimately, everyone was kind of unhappy with where it landed, and it was really, through exhaustion as much as anything else that we got the outcome that we did.
Second longest running COP ever, behind Madrid, and unlike Madrid, I didn't get a nap in the lead up to the conclusion.
So, but the reason I raise that is that there's these two sort of points in the spectrum.
Yep.
One point in the spectrum that seemed, as an observer, to lack sort of consultation and preparation and bringing people on the journey, versus the outcome in Paris, which was really remarkable, and it was really provided. It's the foundational text for everything that has happened subsequently.
Yep.
And we have the opportunity to make a similar contribution, but as you say, Tennant, it's partly about the government sort of understanding that and playing that very proactive role, but arguably all parts of government, state governments, civil society, business, all of these different elements can be brought to bear on that conversation to Australia's benefit and hopefully to the benefit of the world.
Yeah. Now, this was going to be a nice tight 10-minute video, and we've blown through that.
I did think when you listed off the things you wanted to talk about, the 10 minutes, I did smile to myself.
It was the plan was good. It's we who have failed.
I would say that trying to sum up the last 2 weeks in 10 minutes would be pretty tough. But there are a whole bunch of videos that on YouTube, sort of giving you the blow as you go through. So you can dive into those. Various luminaries pop up. Anna Freeman, Richie Merzian,
John Connor,
Darren Miller,
Frankie Muscovich.
Frankie Muscovich features very prominently in many of the videos. She was with us for a week of COP, delightfully so, which brings to mind a certain episode of the podcast that we do with Frankie.
Let me sum up. Available where all fine podcasts are sold for no money.
That is an issue. The business model is a poor one.
But you're the winner.
You are the winner, because we did a COP episode on I think it was the Friday night. Friday night. Yeah, just before Frankie took off, we did an episode.
It's very blurry.
It's a bit blurry. But I think we were able to cover a lot of the colour and movement, and by that point, a lot of the substantive decisions we kind of knew where they landed, and it was really just the cover text that emerged over the subsequent couple of days. So that's worth a listen if you want even more.
And frankly, who wouldn't?
Well, I think what I would say about that episode is you will have to put up with more ramblings from Tennant and I, but you'll have the benefit of Frankie's insightful analysis, which is more than enough motivation to put up with us too for.
That's right. Yes. And so, given that we might have had, by this point, almost, but not quite, too much COP for the time being, perhaps we should sign off.
We should sign off. It has been a delight. Thanks for everyone that's been following along from home. We've invested quite a bit of time in these videos, and that's because I regard being able to come to these sorts of events, travel around the world, as a great privilege. And I think as far as possible, I wanted to, I think Tennant and everybody we've been talking to have wanted to share some of that. It's not practical or plausible for everybody to be able to go, but if we can give you some of the colour and the movement and the odd insight along the way, that's a good thing. So hopefully they've been useful. And I don't know, Tennant, see you at COP28?
I can hardly wait, but I will.
I can wait. I'm quite happy that I can have a little rest now, which we're going to go do now. Thanks, team.